Good morning everyone. Let's talk about screw home mechanism. Screw home mechanism is restricted to tibiofemoral joint. So what we know about screw home mechanism is, imagine this is your femur, sorry for the diagram, this is your tibia, the center portion of the tibia is known as spine. Okay, your femur has to rotate in either direction, being the axis, the spine. That's the name screw home mechanism. So these are going to be your contents. Let's dive into it without further ado. Movements. The first one, movement of the knee joint to describe about screw home mechanism. What are the movements? Flexion, extension. Normal ranges: flexion 0 to 135 degree, extension 135 to 0 degree. So imagine a person is just sitting with his other knee, that is the extended knee, in a normal flex position of 90 degree. What he wants to do, he wants to straighten up the knee, that is known as your extension. So what he does is, he uses his one set of muscle in order to get the knee into extension motion, that is known as your extension. So flexion range 0 to 135 degree normal, extension range normal is 135 to 0 degree. There's one more term known as genu recurvatum. I'll write it down for you all. Genu recurvatum, which is normally about 0 to 5 degree. Genu recurvatum is nothing but your hyperextension of the knee. If it is more than 5 degree, definitely it is abnormal. Now coming to the next one, the muscles of the knee joint, which are the flexors and the extensor. Flexors are nothing but your hamstring, and extensors are nothing but your quadriceps. So extensors are located in the front aspect of the knee joint, the aspect known as anterior aspect. The extensors are located in the posterior compartment, also known as the back of the knee joint, as shown in the diagram. Coming to the positions, weight bearing and non-weight bearing position. There are two types of weight bearing positions of the knee joint when we're talking about, depending on the distal part of the extremity. In non-weight bearing, that is this diagram, look at the distal part of the lower extremity, that is your foot aspect. In non-weight bearing, the foot aspect is not touching. In weight bearing, the foot aspect is touching to the floor. So in non-weight bearing, which bone moves? The tibia moves, because tibia is freely movable. In non-weight bearing, tibia moves over femur, that is N, T and F. And in weight bearing position, W, F and T. In weight bearing position, femur moves over tibia. The best example for weight bearing position is squatting, and best example for non-weight bearing position is unilateral stance, single limb stance. Coming to locking and unlocking of the knee. Locking is nothing but extension motion of the knee, when the knee goes into complete extension via your extensors of the knee, that is nothing but your quadriceps. Unlocking is nothing but your flexion, when the knee unlocks itself via your which muscle? Flexors of the knee, that is your hamstring, which is located posteriorly. Now coming to what are the lockers and unlockers. When we talk about the knee locking or unlocking, we know that locking is extension, but one muscle locks up the knee joint tightly, that is known as your locker of the knee, that is your vastus medialis obliquus. There's one muscle to unlock the knee suddenly, that is known as your unlocker, that is your popliteus. Now coming to which movement of the bone causes locking and unlocking. What are the movements? We know flexion and extension, that is only your locking and unlocking. There must be some movement to cause locking of the knee and unlocking of the knee. The movements are your rotation. What did we learn in the last slides? Non-weight bearing, which bone moves? Tibia moves over femur. Weight bearing, which bone moves? Femur moves over tibia. So when we talk about non-weight bearing, remember tibia moves over femur, and which motion? Rotation for locking and unlocking. So when we are doing flexion, tibia moves over femur, tibia rotates over femur, medially. So flexion medially. Extension, tibia rotates over femur laterally. Extension laterally. So now this rotation cannot occur throughout the range of motion from 0 to 135 and from 135 to 0. It occurs in a specific range. Initially, when you want to flex the knee, that is when you want from 0 degree extension position, you just want to start flexion of the knee for about 20 to 30 degree. From 0 degree to 20 to or 30 degree of flexion, the tibia rotates medially over femur, and in the last 20 degree of extension, that is from around about last 20 degree, from last 20 to 0 degree of extension, your tibia rotates laterally over femur to get it into extension position. Coming down to the diagram, this is your standing position, that is when your feet are touching the ground, and when you lift the leg, that is on your unilateral stance, one leg is in flexion. You tend to, when you're increasing the flexion, the tibia is moving towards medial side. Tibia is rotating medially. That's what we learned. During flexion, tibia rotates medially. Coming down to a weight bearing position. Which bone moves over which bone? Femur moves over tibia in weight bearing position. What is the movement? Rotation. So during flexion, it is exactly opposite. Just check. During flexion, femur rotates laterally. There it was FM. Here it is FL. Femur rotates laterally. And during extension, femur rotates medially. Extension medially. Again, the same thing happens in weight bearing position, last 20 to 30 degree, whether it is the deciding range, whether you want to extend the knee or flex the knee. Depending on that, locking and unlocking happens. This is the best example. A person is standing wherein the knee joint are perfectly stable and extended. When he decides to squat down completely, imagine this is your center line and this is your ideally your tibia should look like this. The tibia is getting rotated laterally when he is going to increase the flexion range, because the foot is fixed, and thus it is weight bearing position. Coming to muscles for flexion extension. When we are flexing initially, we know the flexors of the knee joint are hamstring. We also know the unlocker of the knee joint is popliteus. Initially, when you start flexing the knee from 0 degree position of extension, initially your unlocker has to activate. In the initial range of flexion, unlocker activates first, that is your popliteus, and thus to increase the range of flexion, vast hamstring comes into action. When we are talking about extension, from 135 degree or 90 degree of flexed knee, when you decide your knee to go into extension, initially quadriceps comes into action. In the last 20 to 30 degree of extension range, the locker of the knee, that is your VMO, comes into action. So these are the muscular action for flexion and extension and your screw home mechanism. Coming to the last point, importance of rotation of the bone. First thing, without rotation there is no unlocking and locking of the knee joint. That is what we learned on the first slide. Second point, rotations are dominated by glidings because your medial condyle of the femur is little distally placed compared to the lateral condyle of the femur. Thus, rotations are dominated by glidings of the bone. Also remember, a combination of movement is needed to cause smooth movement of the bones without friction. Thus, rotations are combined with glidings to complete the flexion and extension ranges to occur smoothly. That is your third point. So, I hope you all understood what is screw home mechanism. Let's meet you all in the next class for biomechanics of the knee joint. Thank you so much.